Recognise this? If you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino, you almost certainly do. I am in the town of Görlitz, which is sometimes known as Görliwood because it's appeared in so many movies and TV shows. And I'm particularly interested in a story that happened in the 15th century. Yeah, they went to war over beer.
On this channel, I like to highlight places that the average tourist doesn't normally get to see, yet here I am in Görlitz, a small city with a pretty successful tourist industry. But the average tourist to Görlitz may not even have heard of the beer war, so let's tell that story while we explore the place. Now, Görlitz is on the banks of the Lusatian-Neisse River, something that has consequences for the city which we'll get back to later. Today, it's in quite a remote location, but back in the medieval period, it was an important and influential centre of trade for the entire region. It grew rich on woad, a plant used for its blue dye and in demand all over Europe. This building had many uses before, in the 16th century, it was converted to store woad and is still called the Woad House. But of course, woad wasn't the only thing that Görlitz was famous for. Beer was another important industry and the one that we're particularly interested in.
The beer war, or the beer feud as it's also called, was essentially a kind of a trade war. There was a law in effect that said that only beer brewed in Görlitz could be sold and served in Görlitz and in the surrounding area. Well, this was not very welcome news to brewers in other towns who basically wanted to get in on the act, and this was particularly the case with brewers from Zittau, because the beer in Zittau was renowned as perhaps the best in the world.
It was Emperor Charles IV who in 1367 decreed that pubs in and around Görlitz were to serve only beer brewed in Görlitz. Later, in 1489, when Görlitz was part of the lands of the Bohemian crown, King Matthias Corvinus further decreed that nobody was to sell any other beer within 1.5 miles of the city, and the people of Görlitz were authorized to confiscate illegal beer and punish those who were selling it. The people of Görlitz wasted no time sending militias out to the villages, confiscating foreign beer and making arrests. But things got out of hand when, on the 29th of May 1491, a group of young men ambushed a delivery of beer from Zittau, smashed the barrels and poured all the beer away. The problem was that this happened on land belonging to Zittau, meaning the Görlitzers had literally crossed the line and were out of their jurisdiction. The result of that was an official feud. The injured party, in this case the city of Zittau, would send a letter to the other party, that is Görlitz, declaring a feud, which was in effect a kind of small war. People from both cities could attack and even kill each other, although not if they were in their homes or in church, and they could set fire to fields and buildings and confiscate each other's property. Immediately after this letter had been delivered, soldiers from Zittau raided a village belonging to Görlitz and took 25 horses, 149 oxen, 170 pigs, and large quantities of beds, clothes, and money. And they informed the farmers that they would have to come to Zittau and buy back their livestock. They didn't, so the Zittauers slaughtered the animals. And then things got even more petty.
A poet from Zittau composed a taunt song about Görlitz, and when a certain Caspar Weber from Horka came to Görlitz and sang it, he was arrested and publicly flogged.
A taunt song is exactly what it sounds like, a song specially composed to make fun of the enemy. And by the way, this statue of Justice, who you might be surprised to learn was not originally blindfolded, stands outside the oldest part of the City Hall, which at the time was responsible for the administration of justice. I should though point out that she wasn't put here until about 100 years after the Beer War. Over the centuries, as Görlitz grew, so did the City Hall, with its most recent extension built in Neo-Renaissance style in 1903, exactly 600 years after the settlement was first granted a charter. It bears the coats of arms of not just Görlitz, but of 5 other towns and cities that formed what was known as the Lusatian League, even though by that time the Lusatian League no longer existed. The oldest part of the complex was originally the private residence of a Bohemian vassal, acquired by the city when it needed a city hall. The tower was added to in the 16th century, and one of the additions was a remarkable clock. The upper dial shows the hour on a 24-hour clock and the phases of the moon. The lower dial is a more familiar 12-hour clock, but watch the face in the middle. This was a watchman who, on the 30th of April 1556, failed to raise the alarm in time. Too late, he noticed a raging fire which we can see reflected in his eyes as his mouth drops open in horror. Thanks to his dereliction of duty, 40 houses burned down, and according to legend, he was, by way of punishment, walled into the tower and left to die. And while we're here at the lower marketplace, does any of this look hauntingly familiar? Because it was used as a location for Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, and there are several other locations dotted about the historic quarter as well. In fact, it's not just this movie. Görlitz has been a very popular filming location since the 1950s, starring in an impressively long list of movies and TV shows, and that includes a few Hollywood films. The interior of this old department store, now sadly no longer open, featured in the Grand Budapest Hotel. Görlitz escaped being destroyed in the Second World War as advancing Soviet troops crossed the Neisse River elsewhere, so with its largely intact historic centre, it is great for period movies. The city's tourist board is keen to push what it calls Görliwood. But returning to the all-important beer war, things were starting to get serious. On the 3rd of June 1491, men from Zittau raided the village of Heidersdorf and looted everything they could carry, an act rather more provocative than a silly song.
This is not something that the citizens of Görlitz were prepared to take lying down. They put together a militia of 2,000 soldiers, citizens and farmers posted near the village of Leschwitz, and they were prepared to kill anybody coming from Zittau.
In addition, they manned the city's defences, and this is the remains of one of the heavily fortified bastions, although the towers and arcade are much more recent additions. This was on the outer wall with an extra watchtower on the inner wall. As was quite common, Görlitz had what was basically a double wall, and a few small parts of the defensive system survive to this day. It's just about traceable on a modern map. A contemporary map shows it much more clearly. It also shows houses outside of the perimeter but still protected by additional gates, such as this area protected by the Dark Gate. Just outside of the Dark Gate was the official residence of the executioner, which guides will tell you is because the job of executioner was a dishonourable one. Actually, it seems the executioner originally lived inside the walled city, and this was in fact the place of execution. It was only during certain periods in the history of Görlitz that the executioner actually lived here. As it turns out, the beer war quickly ran out of steam. The Görlitz City Council decided that a diplomatic solution was probably best. Defending the right to sell beer by trying to kill anyone walking towards them might be an overreaction. The local bailiff declared an end to the feud and ordered Zittau to pay compensation to Görlitz. Zittau actually refused, feeling this was a humiliation, but surrounding towns and villages collected 300 guilders to pay Zittau's fine. Anything to stop soldiers marching through them all the time to fight each other. All this happened at the very end of the medieval period, but Görlitz is now a very different place, although its historic centre is still very much intact. It experienced rapid growth during the Industrial Revolution, as evidenced by the huge area to the southwest of the centre full of buildings typical of that era. This fire station is almost exactly 100 years old and is still in use, although there are plans to build a modern facility next door. But all is not well, and although in recent decades this area has been extensively renovated, there are still many clear signs of decay and neglect. The railway station was built to serve a smallish but influential and important city, but now serves only local trains, as if Görlitz is just a backwater. Work on modernising the station is going ahead, but frustratingly slowly. The line isn't even electrified. The city's trams were all built in the 1980s, although if things go according to plan, they should be replaced with modern trams later this year. So, what happened? Well, the Second World War happened, after which it was decided that the border between Germany and Poland needed to be redrawn.
The new border was drawn along the rivers Oder and Neisse, which means that, well, this river marks the border between Germany and Poland. And it had the unfortunate effect of splitting Görlitz in two.
While all of the medieval city was on the left bank, the Industrial Revolution saw Görlitz spread to the other side of the river Neisse. Those settlements were now cut off and constitute the Polish town of Zgorzelec. These days, the two municipalities cooperate very closely together, with the Schengen Treaty making things a whole lot easier on that score, at least for now. Germany has recently tightened border controls, which has already led to issues for commuters, and Poland may follow suit. But on a more personal note, and although it did happen a long time before Schengen, I wonder if Zgorzelec deliberately built these residential apartments on a hilltop visible from the most historic part of Görlitz. All this is a shame, really, because Görlitz was once an important city connecting Dresden, Wrocław and Berlin, but is now a remote border town. It is, though, a beautiful place, with more to offer than you might think, and a lot more to offer than I could fit into this video. Görlitz is on the easternmost edge of Germany, near the tri-point with Poland and Czechia. As I said in the video, there are no long-distance trains. By train you'll need to take an RB or RE train from Dresden, bound for Görlitz or Zgorzelec. Note that these trains divide at Bischofswerda, with one half going to Zittau, so be careful to board the right car. I found that a lot of restaurants and cafes in the historic centre don't accept credit or debit cards, and some don't even accept German Giro cards. When visiting the Polish side, remember that it is a legal requirement to carry a passport or government ID when crossing the border. There are no routine passport controls, of course, but you can still be stopped by border police. Also remember that Poland still uses its own national currency, the zloty, so if you're paying cash, you'll want to get it converted.